I spent that winter weekend completely alone at my cabin on the edge of town. It wasn't deep wilderness. There were other houses nearby, but they were spaced far enough apart that days could pass without seeing another person. After a heavy snowfall, the entire area felt unnaturally quiet. The trees behind my house were buried under thick white layers, making the forest look deeper, darker, almost endless. I loved the isolation. That was the whole reason I moved there. The first night passed normally until close to midnight. I had been half asleep on the couch watching videos before finally turning everything off and heading down the hallway to my bedroom. My room sat at the very end of the house. Floor-to-ceiling windows covered one wall, along with a sliding glass door that opened straight toward the woods. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it sometimes felt like the forest was staring back. As I shut off the lights and climbed into bed, I heard it. A slow, sharp, cracking sound, coming from outside. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like a foot snapping a frozen branch. A few seconds passed. Then it happened again. I sat up, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. With the lights off, I could see surprisingly well. For nearly half a minute, nothing moved. Then a shadow shifted between two trees. It wasn't a clear shape, just movement, like someone leaning into view then pulling back. I didn't breathe. After minutes of silence, I convinced myself it was nothing, my mind playing tricks on me. I checked the sliding door, made sure it was locked, and forced myself to lie back down. Sleep didn't come easily. The next day felt wrong. Nothing happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every window felt like an open eye. Every time I turned my back, my skin crawled. That night, snow started falling again, and I told myself no one would be out there in that weather. Around 10 p.m., I was watching TV by the fireplace when I noticed something odd. The light in the small den was off. I was certain I'd left it on. I walked over and flipped it back on, brushed it off, and returned to the couch. Less than a minute later, I glanced over my shoulder. The light was off again. This time, the switch had been physically flipped down. Someone was inside my house. My phone was in my bedroom. My keys were by the front door. I needed both. I quietly moved toward my room and froze. Outside the bedroom window, fresh footprints cut through the snow. They stopped just feet from the glass. A tall figure stood there, completely still, staring in at me. I ran. As I grabbed my keys, I heard footsteps circling the house, more than one. I burst outside, jumped into my car, and saw the man sprinting toward me from around the corner. I barely escaped. When police arrived later, my house was destroyed from the inside. Broken windows, furniture overturned, doors ripped from their hinges. They believe at least 3 people had been inside. I sold that cabin shortly after. Even now I still dream of that dark hallway and the room with the light turned off, waiting for me to walk inside. When my marriage ended, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a hollow structure pretending to be one. My wife and I had bought it together. Too big, too ambitious, something meant for a future that never happened. 4 bedrooms, 2 floors, long hallways that echoed even when you walked slowly, rooms that stayed dark for months at a time. After she left, I thought about selling it, but pride kept me there. I told myself I could fill the space. I worked from home, so I imagined turning one room into an office, another into a gym, maybe a guest room. That never happened. Weeks turned into months, months into years. Most doors stayed shut. Sometimes late at night, I'd stand in the hallway and look down at the row of closed doors and feel something I couldn't explain, like the house was holding its breath. I lived like that for 2 years. That loneliness eventually pushed me to do something impulsive. I adopted a dog. Her name was Piper. She was small, only 8 months old, a beagle mix with big eyes and floppy ears. At the shelter, she was energetic, tail wagging nonstop. She jumped into my lap the moment I sat down. On the drive home, she pressed her face against the window, curious and excited, but the second we walked through the front door of my house, everything changed. She stopped. Her body went stiff. Her ears flattened. She didn't bark, didn't whine, just stood there frozen, staring into the empty living room like she'd walked into something she didn't understand. "It's okay," I said softly. "This is home now." She didn't move. Eventually, she crept forward, step by careful step, sniffing the air like something smelled wrong. I chalked it up to nerves. New place, new smells, new life. I sat on the couch to give her space. Less than 2 minutes later, she jumped up and crawled into my lap, trembling. She stayed there all night. That should have been my first warning. The first night passed quietly, but I barely slept. Piper stayed pressed against my chest, flinching every time the house creaked, which it did often. Old houses make noise, pipes shift, wood settles. At least that's what I told myself. The next morning was better. She followed me around while I made coffee, wagging her tail. She seemed calmer, more like the dog I'd met at the shelter. I felt relieved. I worked upstairs, in the room I used as my office. Piper lay beneath my desk, curled up and sleeping. Every now and then I'd glance down just to make sure she was still there. Around noon, she suddenly stood up. She walked to the doorway and stopped halfway into the hall. Her body stiffened. Her ears rose slowly. She stared down the hallway, unmoving. "Piper?" I called. She didn't respond. After a few seconds, she walked out of the room. I heard her nails clicking against the hardwood as she headed toward the stairs. I assumed she was exploring. 10 minutes later, the barking started. It echoed through the house, sharp, frantic, panicked. I shot up from my chair and ran out into the hallway. Her barks bounced off the walls, making it impossible to tell where she was. "Piper!" I yelled. I ran downstairs, opening doors, moving from room to room until I found her. She was standing in the middle of one of the empty rooms on the first floor. The room was completely bare. No furniture, no boxes, nothing. She was barking at the wall. Not the window, not the door. The wall. Her whole body shook as she barked, like something was on the other side of it. When she noticed me, she rushed over and pressed against my leg, tail tucked tight. I stared at the wall. There was nothing there. I closed the door to that room and carried her upstairs. That night I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but when I woke up in the middle of the night, Piper was standing at the bedroom door. She was completely still, staring at the small gap between the door and the frame, listening. I wish I could say things stopped there. They didn't. The next evening, around 6, I checked under my desk. Piper wasn't there. I searched the office, the hallway, upstairs rooms. Nothing. The house was silent in a way that made my ears ring. "Piper?" I called. No response. I walked downstairs, my heart beating faster with every step. That's when I saw the door. The same room. The one she'd barked at before. The door was cracked open. I was certain I had closed it. I pushed it open slowly. Piper sat in the far corner, shivering. She looked at me like she was begging me not to come any closer. Something inside me screamed to turn around, and that's when I saw him. At the far end of the hallway, near the stairs, a shape leaned back into the shadows. A person, watching us. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Footsteps approached, slow, unhurried. They stopped right outside the door. Piper whimpered. I didn't move. After what felt like forever, the footsteps walked away. Later, police would tell me the truth. Someone had been living inside my house for months, sleeping in a closet during the day, watching me at night, and if I hadn't adopted Piper, I don't think I'd be alive. I don't remember how long I stood there in that room after the footsteps faded. Time didn't move normally. It stretched and folded in on itself. Every second felt like a minute. Every minute felt like an hour. Piper stayed pressed into the corner, her body trembling so hard I could feel it through the floor when I crouched beside her. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to keep her quiet. My heart was pounding so violently that I was afraid whoever had been in the hallway could hear it through the walls. I didn't dare unlock the door. I didn't dare breathe loudly. I stood there, holding my dog, staring at the door like it might open on its own. Minutes passed, maybe more. I couldn't tell. Finally, when the silence felt almost painful, I slowly pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. Just the sound of the house settling and my own pulse roaring in my ears. I waited another 10 minutes before unlocking the door. When I finally opened it, the hallway was empty. The lights were off. That wasn't how I left them. The darkness pooled at the far end of the hallway like something solid. I didn't step out right away. I just stared, expecting a face to lean out from one of the doorways. Nothing happened. I carried Piper upstairs, locking myself in my bedroom. I dragged my dresser in front of the door and sat on the bed with my phone in my shaking hands. I called the police. They arrived within 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. I didn't move until I heard voices outside, uniformed voices, real ones. 2 officers searched the house while a third stayed with me. Piper wouldn't leave my arms. They took their time, checking every room, every closet, every crawl space. When they came back, their expressions weren't relieved. They were concerned. They told me there was no one inside the house now. But that wasn't the worst part. One of the officers asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "How long have you lived here alone?" 2 years, I said. He nodded slowly. "Have you checked the upstairs guest room recently? The one next to your office?" I told him I hadn't been in there in months. He exchanged a look with the other officer. They asked me to stay downstairs. That's when they found it. In the upstairs guest room closet, behind a stack of old coats and unused boxes, they discovered a space that shouldn't have been there. Someone had cleared it out. Inside were blankets, empty water bottles, food wrappers, old newspapers, a flashlight, even a small pillow. Someone had been sleeping there. For a long time. The officer explained that whoever it was likely stayed hidden during the day, quiet, unmoving, waiting for me to leave rooms, waiting for night. They believed the person used the closet because it shared a wall with my office. They could hear me working, track my schedule, know when it was safe to move. That explained Piper. She wasn't afraid of the house. She was afraid of the person inside it. When they told me that, I felt sick. All I could think about was every night I'd fallen asleep on the couch, every time I'd showered with headphones on, every moment I thought I was alone. I wasn't. The police searched the property and surrounding land, but found no trace of the intruder, no footprints, no vehicle. No neighbors had seen anything unusual. They told me something I'll never forget. "He wasn't panicking," the officer said. "Whoever this was, he was comfortable here." Comfortable, like my home belonged to him. I stayed in a hotel that night, and the next, and the next. I couldn't bring myself to go back alone. When I finally returned with movers to pack my things, the house felt different, smaller somehow, suffocating. Like the walls were watching me pack. Every creak made my stomach flip. I kept expecting to see someone standing at the end of the hallway, watching me leave. I sold the house within a month. Moved into something smaller, brighter. Somewhere I could see every corner from one place. Piper changed completely after we moved. She slept peacefully. She explored freely. She never stared at walls again. But I still do. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I remember the sound of those footsteps stopping outside the door, and I wonder how long he had been watching me before Piper arrived and ruined his hiding place. I was 18 when it happened. Old enough that my parents trusted me to stay home alone for a few days. Young enough that I didn't yet understand how dangerous that trust could be. Our house wasn't isolated or creepy looking. It was a normal suburban home. 2 floors, white siding, a narrow driveway, trimmed lawns on both sides, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. That's what made it worse. My parents left early Friday morning. I remember watching their car disappear down the street, already planning how I'd spend the next few days. Video games, junk food, staying up late, sleeping in, freedom. The first few hours were uneventful. I stayed in bed watching TV, scrolling through my phone, enjoying the quiet. Around late morning, I finally dragged myself downstairs to make breakfast. I had just cracked a couple of eggs into a pan when my phone buzzed. A text from my friend Mark. I didn't check it right away. I figured he was just waiting for me to get online. I finished cooking, sat down, and then opened the message. It said, "Who's the guy outside your house?" I stared at the screen, confused. I typed back, "What guy?" Then I walked to the front window. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just still houses and parked mailboxes. Mark lived directly across from me. I didn't see him at his window either. Another message came in. "There was a dude standing by your front window. He was looking inside." A cold feeling ran through my chest. I stood there longer than I should have, scanning the street, checking the sides of the house. Nothing. I called Mark, thinking it had to be a joke. But when he answered, his voice was serious. "I'm not messing with you," he said. "I saw him. I don't recognize him. He was standing way too close to your house." "Where'd he go?" I asked. "I don't know. He walked out of view." We both tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone lost. Maybe a door-to-door salesman. Maybe Mark just mistook someone walking past. Eventually, we shrugged it off. That was mistake number 1. We hopped on a Discord call and played games for most of the afternoon. I only went downstairs once to refill my water. I checked the window again. Still nothing. By the time we logged off, it was dark outside. I didn't realize how late it had gotten. I went downstairs to make dinner. That's when I saw the shadow. It flickered across the wall in front of me, quick, unnatural, like someone passing directly behind me. I turned around fast. The living room was empty. My eyes moved to the window. Dark, still, no movement. My heart was pounding now, but I forced myself to calm down. Cars pass by all the time, I told myself. Headlights, trees moving. I finished dinner and took my food upstairs, trying not to think about it. I lay in bed watching TV for over an hour. At some point, I realized the only light in my room was coming from the screen. The hallway outside my door was pitch black. I don't know why, but I kept looking at the gap under the door. It felt like something was wrong on the other side. I paused the show and told myself I was being stupid. I needed a snack anyway. When I opened my bedroom door, the feeling got worse. The hallway was too quiet, too dark. I flicked the light on. Empty. Still, I went downstairs and turned on every light I passed. Kitchen, living room, dining area. I even checked the windows again. Nothing. As I headed back upstairs, I stopped halfway up the steps. I had heard something. Footsteps. But they didn't sound right. They sounded like mine. I took a step. The sound echoed. I took another. The echo followed. But when I stopped, there was a delay, like something else had stopped, half a second after I did. My blood went cold. I realized what I was hearing. Someone was matching my steps perfectly. I stood frozen on the staircase, 1 foot raised, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I took another step upward. The sound came again, a fraction of a second late, not an echo, not the house settling. Someone else was moving when I moved. I stayed perfectly still. So did the sound. That was the moment I knew I wasn't alone. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I didn't know where. The front door was downstairs. My room was upstairs. Either direction meant turning my back to whatever was in the house with me. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I took one more step up. The sound followed again, right behind me. Close, too close. I bolted. I ran up the remaining steps, slammed my bedroom door shut, and locked it. My shoulder hit the door so hard the frame rattled. I dragged my desk in front of it and backed into the far corner of my room, staring at the handle. My phone was already dialing 911. The operator's voice sounded calm, distant, like it was coming from another world. "I think someone's inside my house," I whispered. She told me to stay on the line. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. At first there was nothing. Then, a floorboard creaked. Slow. Careful. Someone walking upstairs. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, whispering every sound I heard. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The footsteps stopped outside my room. I stared at the door handle. It didn't move. Instead, the person stood there, listening. I could hear his breathing through the door, shallow, controlled, like he was trying not to be heard. Then he stepped away. 1 step, 2, 3. And then the sound faded. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Minutes passed. I thought maybe he'd left. That's when my phone vibrated. A text from Mark. "He's back." My chest tightened. I whispered to the dispatcher, "My friend sees him again." Mark lived across the street. He could see my house from his front window. Another message came in. "He's on the side of your house by the window." I felt sick. I imagined him standing outside my bedroom, staring in. Then Mark sent another text. "Oh, shit." Before I could reply, he called me. "He just climbed out your side window," Mark said, voice shaking. "He ran into the trees behind your house." I didn't even realize I was crying until the dispatcher told me to unlock the door for police. They arrived minutes later. I stepped outside into the cold night air, shaking so badly one of the officers had to steady me. They searched the house, found an open window on the first floor, mud on the carpet, handprints on the frame. He had been inside. The officer asked me if I knew how long he'd been there. I told him about the footsteps. He nodded slowly. "You're not the first," he said. He told me about another kid in a nearby neighborhood, home alone, similar reports, a man watching from outside, waiting, trying to get inside. They never caught him. That night changed everything. I never stayed home alone again. Even now, years later, when I hear footsteps behind me, I change my pace, just to make sure they don't match.